Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayechi. Once again, it begins on page 269 in the ArtScroll Stone Chumash, and that is Bereshis chapter 47, verse 28. So the Parsha begins, Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147 years. And then it says the time of approach for Israel to die. So he called for his son Yosef and said to him, please, if I had found favor in your eyes, and etc., he gave him instructions for having him buried in the land of Israel. But to begin, it says that he lived in the land of Egypt. If you look at the way it describes his life, it says he lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Then it says that all the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147 years. So the commentaries ask about this whole verse it seems very redundant. And the first part that it says that he lived in Egypt 17 years, we should be able to do the math ourselves. Because back a few Parshios ago, when Yaakov first came to Mitzrayim, actually last week's Parsha, Yaakov came to Egypt, and it said he stood before Paro, and Paro said, like, how old are you? And Yaakov said, I'm 130 years old. Now it says that he's 147 years old. We should be able to do the math ourselves and see that he was in Egypt 17 years. So why is that necessary? And also it says the days of Yaakov, the years of his life were 147 years. What's that added, the years of his life? So the Orach Chaim answers that there's a number of things important about the 17 years he was in Egypt. And one of them is that Yosef was sold into slavery when he was 17 years old. So that means that Yaakov supported Yosef for 17 years. He gave him food and he sustained him for 17 years. So the Torah is emphasizing that Yaakov was in Egypt 17 years and Yosef, and that was a return of the favor. So, and we find this symmetrical, that parents take care of their children in their childhood, and as parents age, so many times the roles are switched, and it's the child's job to take care of the parent. And that was true in this case, that Yaakov took care of Yosef for 17 years until he was left the house and was sold into slavery. And now at the end of his life, Yaakov was supported by his son Yosef for 17 years. So he had that chance to return the favor. And to the point that the Orach Chaim says that in verse 29, it says the time approached for Israel to die. He wasn't really dying yet, because we find later in chapter 48, at the bottom of the page, it says, and it came to pass after these things that someone said to Yosef, behold, your father is ill. Meaning he wasn't ill yet when that happened, when the Parsha begins. He was just, the time approached for him to die. He was aging, and he saw that death was near, but he wasn't that sick yet. So how did he know it was time? The time was approaching for him to die. The Orach Chaim says he understood that the reason why he was alive was because Yosef needed that chance to return the favor of the support that he gave. And he said that he shouldn't be alive otherwise. It was just he was alive in order to give his son an opportunity to return the favor of the support. So when since he was in Egypt 17 years, he knew that Yosef that time had concluded, that he needed to support him, and now he's not going to live very long. He knew that. And about the way the Torah says that, and the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147 years, that it breaks it up like that the years of his life, the days of Yaakov, the years of his life. So the Orach Chaim answers that Yaakov had a very hard life. And if you look through his life, he was born, his enemy, he didn't even have a second to breathe. He was born as a baby. His enemy was born with him, Esav, who exists really as a counter to Yaakov and as a menace and a nemesis of Yaakov. They were born together as twins, and Esav was even born first. So Yaakov didn't even have a second in this world without Esav. So he had Esav. He grew up with Esav, and then he was in danger for his life and fled, and he ends up with Lavan, another nasty character, and lived with Lavan for 20 some odd years. And then what happens? He comes back and he thinks he's ready to settle down. And then Dina, his daughter Dina, is captured and taken captive and raped by Shem. And then when he gets her back, then Yosef is taken away from him, and he thinks he's dead for 22 years or so. I'm sorry, for 30 years. So now he's had a very hard life, and really the first time he's been able to settle down and had a tranquility in his life was these last 17 years, his time in Egypt. That at that time he didn't have these enemies around him. He had his son, who was the de facto king of Egypt. He was the viceroy and the active leader of Egypt, who ran the country, and his sons and family were all around him. That was really when he had a life. And that's what the Torah is saying, that he lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, that was truly the years of his life. Up until then, it was a constant struggle. These were years he was finally able to live in tranquility. And then it says, how long did he actually live? His full life were 147 years. Okay, so, and as we said, it says in verse 29, the time approached for Israel to die. He called for his son Yosef and said, please, if I found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt. And we've mentioned this many times, but it bears repeating. What's this? Place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. He's asking him to swear an oath. And he's asking him to swear an oath, putting his hand under his thigh, because nowadays when we swear an oath, when people are sworn into office, many times they put their hand on it, but they swear in a Bible. And in court, they say, put your hand on this, whatever, on that. They put a hand on the Bible to swear. And in Jewish law, when a court could compel someone to swear an oath, they would actually swear on a Sefer Torah. But that didn't exist at this time. And so what he swore on was the one mitzvah that he had from Hashem, and that was the mitzvah of bris milah, of the circumcision. So he said, place your hand under my thigh and swear on the mitzvah, on the holiest thing we have, which is the mitzvah that we have, which is the mitzvah of bris milah, of circumcision. And said, once again, he had him swear, do not bury me in Egypt. And the commentators say he had him swear not because he didn't believe that he would do it otherwise, but this gives him leverage over Paro, that instead of going to Paro and said, I told my father I would do it, Yosef could tell Paro, I swore to my father, I swore an oath to my father that I would bury him in Canaan, and that would give him some leverage to get Paro to grant this request to have the viceroy leave Egypt, and also to have Yaakov's body leave Egypt, because they would want it there because it brought blessing. And he swore to him. And then it concludes, Israel prostrated himself towards the head of the bed of verse 31. And our sages say that he did this because the divine presence rests at the head of the bed of a sick person. And the Rabbeinu Bachya even quotes a verse from Tehillim, from Psalms, that the verse in Psalm says, I have it written here somewhere. Oh, Hashem Yisadeni al eretz davai, that Hashem supports me on my bed of affliction. And this means that when a person is sick, especially a person's on their deathbed, the Shekhinah, the divine presence is there with them, sustaining them. Okay, so it continues in chapter 48, still on page 269. And it came to pass after these things that someone said to Yosef, behold, your father is ill. So now he's not just old and knowing that his time is near, but he's actually deathly ill. So he took his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, with him. Yaakov was told, behold, your son Yosef has come to you. So Israel exerted himself and sat up on the bed. And on page 271, Yaakov said to Yosef, Kel Shakai has appeared to me in Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. He said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous. I will make you a congregation of nations. I will give this land to your offspring after you as an eternal possession. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before my coming to you in Egypt shall be mine. Ephraim and Menashe shall be mine, like Reuven and Shimon. But progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They'll be included under the name of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. Okay, so the Ramban comments here, and this is actually many commentaries mention this, is that when he said that I'll make you fruitful and numerous, I'll make you a congregation of nations. So they say that that's referring to that prophecy that Yaakov had was referring to two different things. That I'll make you fruitful and multiply. At that time, he had already had 11 of his sons, and Benjamin was yet to be born. So I'll make you fruitful and multiply will tell you that he was going to have another son, and that was Benjamin. But then he said, I will make you a congregation of nations. So that means that he's going to have more than that. And he understood that that was referring to Manasseh and Ephraim. That Manasseh and Ephraim will be as if they were his own sons, and they were additional progeny that he would have. And that's what it means. Your two sons will be mine. They'll be like Reuben and Shimon, meaning that the same way that Reuben and Shimon have their own, or we'll see, not exactly, but had at least their own portion in the land of Israel, Ephraim and Manasseh had as well, because when Reuben had sinned with the bed of his father, so Reuven, the firstborn rights were taken away from Reuven and granted to Yosef. Reuven was the firstborn of Yaakov. Yosef was the firstborn of Rachel. So the firstborn rights were taken away from Reuven and given to Yosef. So Yosef now has a double portion, which is the law of the firstborn. So that double portion manifested itself by Ephraim and Manasseh, each getting a portion in the land of Israel. So now they had twice the portions that the other brothers had, or twice the. I should have you say Yosef had twice the portion than any other brother had, because Reuben and Shimon each. I'm sorry, Ephraim and Manasseh each got their own. Okay. What else did I want to see here? And another thing the Ramban says very interesting in verse 6, it says, but progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They'll be included under the name of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. The Ramban comments that there's nothing wasted in the Torah. There's nothing extra in the Torah. And if Yaakov felt the need to tell him through prophecy and brought in the Torah that if you have any other sons, they won't have their own portion in the land. Only Ephraim and Manasseh do. It must be that Yosef did in fact, have other sons, and there were people for this to apply to. So the Ramban understands from here, what we call a chiddush, is a novelty, that Yosef had other sons other than Manasseh and Ephraim. And he says that their portion, they would have just taken a portion of a piece of Manasseh and Ephraim's portion in the land of Israel, but they didn't have one of their own, just under the general banner of Yosef. Okay, and it continues in verse 7. But as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan on the road, while there was still a stretch of land to go to Ephras, and I buried her there on the road to Ephras, which is Bethlehem, Beis Lechem. And in fact, Rachel is buried in Beis Lechem in Kever Rachel. So the commentaries explain that Yaakov is telling him this now because he had asked him to swear that he was going to bury him in Egypt. So Yosef might be thinking like, wait, I'm sorry, he was swearing him to take him out of Egypt and bury him in the land of Israel in Maras Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah. So Yosef was saying that that's where his parents were buried and his grandparents were buried. But Yosef was thinking, you didn't bury my mother there. Rachel, instead of being buried in Maras Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, was buried in Beit Lechem. So he was saying, why should I do this for you if you didn't even grant my mother that dignified burial? And to that, Yaakov was answering him that was a specific commandment of Hashem to bury her in Beit Lechem. And in fact, when the Jewish people were exiled by the Babylonians from Jerusalem, when they were being brought to Bavel, so they were able to stop on the road by Beis Lechem and pray at the grave of their grandmother, the grave of our matriarch Rachel, and plead for mercy. And in fact, their prayers were answered there, that we were brought back. Okay, so now in verse 8 it says, then Israel saw Joseph's sons, and he said, who are these? And Joseph answered his father, they're my sons whom God has given me here. So we've seen he already knew who they were. He was already talking about Ephraim and Manasseh earlier. So the Medrash says that once they came close, he envisioned these wicked people that would be descended from them, from Ephraim and Manasseh, and they are many of the kings of the Israelite kingdom that seceded from the kingdom of Yehuda, from Judea, so were from the tribe of Yosef, and mostly from Manasseh, some from Ephraim. Let's see if I have this. Okay, so Yeravam and Achav were from Ephraim. They were wicked kings of Israel. And Yehu and his sons were from Manasseh, who are other kings that spread idolatry throughout the land of Israel. So when Yaakov saw them, and so he envisioned this, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, left him, and he was like, "Who are these people?" And Yosef answered him, "They are my sons whom God has given me here." So, and his answer was, "They are my sons," meaning that the good that they have comes from me, and the negativity comes from that they were born here, that God has given me here, and that's where the negativity comes from. And I saw in the commentaries, they say also there was a subtle answer here, which is that he said, you can't criticize me, meaning you can't look at them and say there's something negative about them because of the descendants they'll have, because all the patriarchs, other than Yaakov, remember Yitzchak had Esav. So Yaakov was born with a brother Esav, and Avraham had a son Yishmael. So he's saying you can't complain about the descendants because that's in the hands of Hashem. So now he said, and please bring me to them if I will bless them. And in verse 10, now Israel's eyes were heavy with age, he could not see. So he brought them near him and he kissed them and hugged them. Israel said to Yosef, I dared not accept the thought that I would see your face. Remember, he was missing for 30-ish years. And I'd never thought Yaakov thought he was dead. And here God has shown me even your offspring. And on page 273, that's where I had it. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So on page 273, Yosef then removed them from his knees. He prostrated himself with his face towards the ground. Yosef took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left to Israel's right, and he drew close to him. And that would be the natural to put his right hand on the older son Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh when he blessed them. But Israel extended his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head. He maneuvered his hand, for Manasseh was the firstborn, so he crossed his hands so he could put his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left hand on Manasseh. So Yosef protested. I'm almost there. And in verse 15, we'll get there. But he blessed Yosef and he said, O God, before my forefathers Avraham and Yitzchak walked, God who shepherds me from my inception until this day. May the angel who redeems me from all evil bless the lads, and may my name be declared upon them, and the names of my forefathers Avraham and Yitzchak, and may they proliferate abundantly like fish within the land. And that blessing is the classical blessing that we sing. We say before going to bed. We sing it to my kids before they go to bed. Hamalach Agayolasi. So, but it begins. But he gave an introduction here. O God, before whom my forefathers Avraham and Yitzchak walked, and this is the classical introduction to our prayers that we invoke the merit of our patriarchs. And then he says, God who shepherds me from my inception until this day, which is a very interesting expression. And the commentaries say, it goes to Klayakar, or no. Probably the Klayakar said here that the Hebrew there is, where is it? Oh yeah, Harara Osi Me'odi means from my inception until this day ad hayom hazeh. So he says the numerical value of the word Me'odi from my inception is 130. I counted, it's 130. Is the numerical value. Mem is 40, Ayin is 70, Vav and Dalet together are 10, and Yud is 10. That would equal 130. And that's how long he lived before he got to Egypt. The numerical value of the last word, ad hayom hazeh is 17. It's 575, that's 17. So he was saying that Hashem who led me, who shepherded me, me'odi from my inception, meaning during those 130 years, before I came to Egypt, until this day, until the 17 years that he was in Egypt, he was saying that in both cases Hashem was shepherding him. And even though in the first 130 years he was on his own and sustaining himself, but the 17 years he's being sustained by Yosef, you're saying he still recognized that everything came from Hashem. And even when he had his son supporting him, he was saying his son was a messenger of Hashem to do it, but he was still being shepherded by Hashem. Okay, but now, as we said, Yaakov had crossed his hands, put his right hand on Ephraim's hand, who was the younger, and his left hand on Ephraim, who was his right hand on the younger Ephraim, and his left hand on the older Menashe. So it displeased Yosef, so he supported his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Menashe's, and Yosef said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused, saying, "I know, my son, I know, he too will become a people, and he too will become great. Yet his younger brother shall become greater than he, and his offspring's fame will fill the nations." So he's saying, even though Ephraim's the firstborn, and he will be a great nation, and have greatness come from him, but Ephraim will be even greater. And I say to say that this is a reference to the greatest from each tribe, that Joshua came from Ephraim, and Gideon, who was a great leader of the Jewish people during the time from when they entered the land until the first king, until Shaul. Not over the entire time, but he was one of the leaders over that time. And he was a great leader from Menashe, but he said that Yeshua eclipsed anything that Gideon accomplished. Okay, and something I heard from my Rashiv on this, I know I've mentioned it before, but he said about this is that when it comes to brachos, blessings, you would think that the opposite would be true. That who's the one who needs the blessing more? The one who needs the blessing more is the weaker son. So why did he switch and say, since Ephraim's going to be greater, I'm going to give him the greater blessing? You would think it would be the opposite. Since Ephraim's greater, Menashe needs the greater blessing more. So I'll put my right hand on his head. So he said that that's a misunderstanding about what a blessing is. They said a blessing isn't what we call yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. A blessing doesn't mean that I'll create something out of nothing, give you something that you don't have. A blessing is about growth. It's about, you have this, let's grow it. It should develop, it should grow, it should develop. So he was, and so when Ephraim and Menashe, it's not that Menashe had everything that Ephraim had, just to a lesser extent. What he was saying is Menashe would be great, but there were traits that Ephraim had that didn't exist in Menashe. And that's why he's saying that he needed the greater blessing, because these aspects that Ephraim had that Menashe didn't have, that's where the greater blessing would take effect. So so it wasn't a matter of degree of what they had, is that there was something that Ephraim had that Menashe didn't, and that's where this greater blessing took effect. Okay, and in verse 20, so he blessed them that day, saying, what was his blessing? By you shall Israel bless, saying, may God make you like Ephraim, like Menashe, and he put Ephraim before Menashe, as we said. And I just want to go back, because I forgot to say something I wanted to. In verse 16, where it says, may the angel who redeemed me from all evil bless the lads. So what does that mean, this angel who redeemed me from all evil bless the lads? Why isn't he saying, may Hashem bless the lads? So I think it's the Rabbeinu Bachya comments that, is it? Okay, so I think it's the Rabbeinu Bachya comments that that we find that those two great descendants of Ephraim and Menashe that I mentioned encountered an angel that led them into battle, and that was Yeshua, who was the great descendant of Ephraim, when he was in the outskirts of Jericho, before they began the conquest of the land of Israel. So they were encamped outside Jericho, and an angel appeared to him and strengthened him for battle, rebuked him, etc. So that, and also with Gideon was also visited by an angel who charged him with his mission in saving the Jewish people from their enemies. So the Rabbeinu Baruch said that was this angel that Yaakov was referring to, that this angel that saved him from all evil, he said should be there for the descendants of these boys of Ephraim and Manasseh. And in fact, that angel appeared to each of them, each of their descendants, to protect them and to support them in battle. Okay, so, and then in verse 21 on page 275, now he gave a blessing to Yosef specifically. Then Israel said to Yosef, behold, I'm about to die. Hashem will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. And as for me, I have given you Shechem, one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite, with my sword and with my bow. So he's saying, I'm giving you the city of Shechem, one portion more than your brothers. So our sages say that Shechem is where Yosef ended up being buried. And in fact, that's a problem. Shechem is modern day Nablus, and his tomb is there, and it's occasionally vandalized, unfortunately, by the residents of Nablus. But he's telling him, I'm giving you Shechem, one portion more than your brothers. He was telling him that since Yosef is taking care of his own burial, and Yosef is taking care of Yaakov's burial, and agreed to bring his body to Egypt to be buried, to Israel to be buried in Hebron, he told him, you too will have a place of burial in the land of Israel, which will be Shechem. And then he says that, what about Shechem, that I took one portion more than, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. If you'll remember, the Shechem wasn't captured by Yaakov, it was captured by Shimon and Levi, who went through the city and killed everybody in the city after the Shechem, the prince of the city, captured Dinah. So the Ramban actually says that this was a reference that we find many times in prophecies, that a prophet doesn't just deliver a message, but many times the prophet actually takes an action. Like we find that the prophet shot an arrow in the direction of in the direction of Bavel and said, like, this is represents the destruction of Bavel and things of that nature. And that's to strengthen the prophecy by making it more than just words. It's actually taking an action to begin or initiate the fulfillment, actually brings it into the physical world in a sense. It's like it starts off as a vision, as a spiritual thing, and it turns into words that he delivers. But when he actually takes an action, brings it into the physical world, that actually like solidifies the prophecy into a real event. And so he's saying that Yaakov, when he mentioned that that he's giving him Shechem, the city of Shechem, so he brandished a sword and a bow, kind of to bring it into the physical world. That it's as if he's capturing it, and that will bring about the capture. Okay. So now in chapter 49 on page 275, we have the blessings for all of Yaakov's sons. So it says in verse 1, then Yaakov called his sons and assembled and said, assemble yourselves, I'll tell you what will befall you in the end of days. Gather yourselves and listen, O sons of Yaakov, and listen to Israel your father. So our sages say that at first he said, what will befall you at the end of days, meaning he wanted to tell them the time of Mashiach. But when they came to him, so had the divine spirit, the Shekhinah, the divine presence left him. And then he just said, listen to Israel your father. Reuven, you are my firstborn, my strength, my initial vigor, foremost in rank and foremost in power, meaning Reuven was the firstborn, and he was deserving foremost in rank, meaning that he should be the Kohen, the firstborn, the one who serves Hashem, and foremost in power, he should be also the king should come from Reuven. But he said, water like impetuosity, or something along those lines. It's almost just moving too quickly without thinking, and almost impulsiveness. You cannot be my foremost because you mounted your father's bed, then you desecrated him who ascended my couch, and referring to the sin that he committed when he got involved in his father's marriage, with when he moved his father's bed from the tent of Bilhah to Leah, which took place previously, we've discussed. So he said, you can't be the firstborn because of that, you're too impulsive, and being a leader, especially a king, needs to be able to think in a measured way and act based on the deep thinking about the ramifications of what he would do, and impulsiveness is very destructive to that, and moving too quickly is destructive. So that's Reuven. Then on verse 5 on page 277, Shimon and Levi are comrades. They're partners in crime. Their weaponry is a stolen craft. Into their conspiracy may my soul not enter, with the congregation do not join. Oh, my honor, for in their rage they murdered people, and at their whim they hamstrung an ox. Accursed is their rage, for it is intense, and their wrath, for it is harsh. I will separate them from within Yaakov, and I will disperse them in Israel. So Shimon and Levi, it says their weaponry is a stolen craft. It's a very interesting verse that the Hebrew there is actually klei chamas v'charusehem. Maybe you could hear some Hamas in there, but their weaponry is a stolen craft. And Rashi says that this is referring to, and most of this is referring to the killing of all the citizens of Shechem when after Dinah was captured. That Dinah was captured by and kidnapped by Shechem, who was the prince of the city, and was raped by her, and he wanted to marry her. And Shimon and Levi convinced all the people in the city that if you just circumcise yourself, we'll join together and we'll do business with each other and we'll marry your wives, you can marry our daughters. And when they were in pain and from the circumcision, they rampaged through the city, killing everybody. So there, Yaakov's comment to them was, their weaponry is a stolen craft. And Rashi says, what does that mean? Is that that kind of action of killing an entire city out of revenge is that's a stolen craft, meaning that doesn't belong to us. That belongs to Esav. Meaning when Yaakov disguised himself as Esav to get the blessings from Yitzchak, so it says there that the hands are the hands. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, but the hands are the hands of Esav. Meaning Yaakov's weaponry is his voice, is the power of prayer and Torah study. Esav's weaponry is swords and bows and weapons of war. So he's saying when they killed out the entire city, they were stealing Esav's hands. They were acting like Esav, and he says you have to remember who you are. And it seems how they lost track of who they were and stole Esav's approach. Okay, I'll leave it at that. And it concludes in verse 7 that I will separate them within Yaakov, and I will disperse them in Israel. And in fact, Levi and Shimon and Levi, these two brothers, they did not get really their own portion in the land of Israel. Levi had cities scattered throughout the land, but didn't have a continuous portion. That's Levi. And Shimon had a part of Yehuda's portion was dedicated to Shimon. But they didn't really have their own portion in the land, and this kind of scattered them throughout the land. And our sages even say that the wandering scribes and preachers and teachers of Israel who wander from city to city and don't really have a place to settle, they're probably from the tribe of Shimon as a result of this blessing. Okay, so now in verse 8. So after their blessings were criticisms, so our sages say Yehuda was shrinking away from him, And here it says, Yehuda, he drew him close with appeasing words. Your brothers shall acknowledge your hand. Your brothers shall acknowledge you. Your hand will be at your enemy's nape. Your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. That you will actually rule over your brothers. A lion covers Yehuda from the prey, my son. You elevated yourself. He crouches, lies down like a lion, and like an awesome lion, who dares rouse him? That Yehuda is strong like a lion, and will his brothers bow down to him. He's to be the leader of the Jewish people. The scepter shall not depart from Yehuda, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh shall arrive, and his will be an assemblage of nations. That the scepter, meaning the being king, will not descend, and from the time that King David was made king over Yehuda, every legitimate king was from Yehuda, and any other king who was not from Yehuda were usurpers who eventually were punished. And even Yeravam ben Nevat, who was the first king of the Israelites, who seceded from the kingdom of Yehuda, so he was actually coronated by a prophet of Hashem, but that was to be a temporary measure. And the fact that they continued with it, where they were punished for it, and even the Ramban says the Chashmonaim, the Maccabees, meaning the Maccabees who fought against the Syrian Greeks. So after they were Kohanim, which means they were from the tribe of Levi, and after they defeated the Greeks, so they made themselves kings. but each of them died. Each king, there were, I don't remember, 4 brothers, I think, who were king one after the other, and they each died in battle. And that was a punishment for having made themselves kings instead of appointing a king from the tribe of Yehuda. But over time, our leaders traditionally have been from Yehuda. Okay, where are we? Oh, and then it says Noah, scholar from among his descendants, that the great scholarly leadership also came from Yehuda, which included the Nesiim, the leaders of the Jewish people at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, were the greatest scholars, were also from the tribe of Yehuda, including Hillel and Rabban Gamliel and Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, all came from Yehuda. And then it concludes with the with blessings of his land, that he will tie his donkey to the vine in verse 11, to the vine branch his donkey's foal. He will launder his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes, red-eyed from wine and white-toothed from milk, meaning his land will be very productive with wine, with grapes for wine, and with milk from, I think, sheep and goats. And our sages say, I actually learned studied this recently in Pesachim, the Gemara, the Talmud says that during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the time of the temple, when if you found vinegar from Yehuda, and the vinegar then was made from wine, it was wine vinegar. So they're saying, it wasn't really made from wine. It was actually made from soaked, like water mixed with wine sediments, because they said that the wine of Yehuda never went bad. It never became vinegar. That it was of such great quality. Okay, continuing on in verse 13 on page 279. Zevulun shall settle by the seashore, he shall be at the ship's harbor, and the last border will reach Sidon, and Zevulun were, they had a port where, and they became traders from the port. And then in verse 14, Yisachar is a strong-boned donkey, rest between the boundaries. He saw tranquility, that it was good in the land, that it was pleasant, yet he bent his shoulder to bear, and he became an indentured laborer. This means that he was a strong-boned donkey, that a donkey is something that people use to carry very heavy burdens, because it's as it says, strong-boned. It could bear great weight and perform a lot of work. And this is an allegory for Yisachar study, accepting the yoke, the burden of Torah study. That it says he saw tranquility, that it was good in the land, that it was pleasant, that in order to study Torah, someone needs a clear mind, a tranquil mind, and the land that it was pleasant refers to the land of Israel, that the land of Israel is the ideal place for Torah study. Okay, then in verse 16 is a fascinating set of verses. Dan will avenge his people, the tribe of Israel will be united as one. Verse 17, Dan will be a serpent on the highway, a viper by the path, that bites a horse's heel so its rider falls backwards. For your salvation do I long, O Hashem. So our sages say that this is referring specifically to the great descendant of Dan, and that is Shimshon, Samson, from the tribe of Dan, who was one of the judges, as we mentioned, one of those leaders from that time before in the land of Israel, before the first king Shaul. And he fought against the Philistines, but he was never like the head of leading an army of Jews against the Philistine army. He actually lived amongst the Philistines, and at times was greatly inspired with the spirit of Hashem, and killed many Philistines in skirmishes, but it was never like a proper pitched battle. And that's what this is referring to, that he will be like a serpent on the highway, a viper by the path, and that would ambush them and fight in like almost guerrilla warfare, but not actually like a proper battle, that bites a horse's heel so his rider falls backward. And for your salvation do I long, O Hashem. And our sages say that that's actually a reference, that bites a horse's heel so his rider falls backwards, for his final victory that Shimshon had, and that was he was actually captured by the Philistines and blinded and tied to 2 pillars, where all the leadership of the Philistines came to mock him, all the important people came to mock him, and he prayed for help from Hashem for one last act of great strength, and he pulled the pillars that he was tied to down, and the entire building collapsed on him and all the important Philistines. And that's the bites a horse's heel so his rider falls backwards, that it was an indirect slaughter. but it concludes, "For your salvation do I long, O Hashem." So I think it's the Ramban who says here that that when Yaakov envisioned the end of Shimshon, that he was captured by the Philistines and tortured by the Philistines, saying that had never happened to a great leader of the Jewish people. That that they was killed and that he was captured and tortured by our enemies and killed. So that had never happened. So then he prayed and said, "I see our salvation isn't coming from these human leaders. Our salvation only comes from Hashem." Okay, then in verse 19, God will recruit a regiment or retreat on its heel, meaning that there's two ways that a regiment goes away from the enemy. They could run forward, that's retreating on their toes, but retreating on their heels means they're moving backwards. And that was God. God was, they were the forefront of the attack at all times. So even during a retreat, they were moving backwards and fighting as they went. They were mighty warriors. And in verse 20, from Asher, his bread will have richness. He'll provide kingly delicacies. That Asher has will have great produce in their lands. And in verse 21, from Naphtali is a hind let loose who delivers beautiful sayings. A hind is like a deer. That our sages say that the produce in the land of Naphtali will ripen very quickly. And this last phrase, who delivers beautiful sayings, our sages says is a reference to the victory of Devorah, where they fought against Sisera in a battle with Sisera. So the victory, the most of the soldiers then in that battle were from the tribe of Naphtali, and they brought about this great victory following Devorah saying a great song of thanksgiving to Hashem, of prophetic thanksgiving to Hashem, which is the beautiful sayings that are referenced here. And now in verse 22, he blesses his beloved son Yosef. There's a charming son is Yosef, a charming son to the eye. Each of the daughters climbed heights to gaze, that the Egyptian girls would climb. He was so handsome, the Egyptian girls would climb over walls to get a glimpse of him. They embittered him and became antagonists, referring to his brothers. The arrow-tongued men hated him, that they spoke ill of him. But his bow was firmly in place, and his arms were gilded from the hands of the mighty power of Yaakov. From there he shepherded the stone of Israel. And I say this word, the stone, the Hebrew is Evan, which the commentaries say is actually a contraction of Av and Ben, the father and son. And that's referring to Yaakov, his father, and his brothers, Yaakov's sons, that he shepherded them and provided for them. And, okay. And in verse 25, that was from the God of your father. He will help you, and with Shakai, he will bless you with blessings of heaven from above, blessings of the deep crouching below, blessings of the bosom and the womb. The blessings of your father surpass the blessings of my parents to the endless bounds of the world's hills. That the commentaries say that that Avram and Yitzchak were promised the land of Israel, whereas the promise to Yaakov was the Hebrew is Ufarasta Yama V'Kedma V'Tzafan V'Negba. You will disperse. You will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south, meaning though that the descendants of Yaakov will spread out in all directions to all the corners of the earth. So his blessing was surpassed the blessings of his parents, and that's what he's continuing to the endless bounds of the world's hills. Let them be upon Yosef's head and upon the head of the exile from his brothers. He gave a beautiful blessing to his beloved son Yosef, and then it concludes in verse 27, Binyamin is a predatory wolf. In the morning he will devour prey, and in the evening he will distribute spoils. So our sages say that this blessing to Binyamin is a reference to morning, and the evening is a reference to the morning is the early days of the kings of Yehuda, of the kings of Israel, and that is the first king of Israel was Shaul, who was from the tribe of Binyamin. That was before King David. So the king was Saul, who was from the tribe of Binyamin. And that's in the morning he'll devour prey. And then it says in the evening he'll distribute spoils. That's a reference to the end of or after the first temple period. And that's Mordechai, who is also Mordechai and Esther, who are from the tribe of Binyamin. And they will distribute spoils and enrich and lead the Jewish people at that time. And it concludes, all these are the tribes of Israel, 12, and this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them. He blessed each according to their appropriate blessing, and he told them that I'm going to die, and please bring me to bury with me in Machpelah. And on page 285, verse 33, when Yaakov finished instructing his sons, he drew his feet onto the bed, he expired, and was gathered to his people. So on page 285 of chapter 50, then Yosef fell upon his father's face. He wept over him, kissed him. Yosef ordered his servants, the physicians, embalm his father. The physicians embalmed Israel. So where am I here? Oh yeah. So he told Paro that I swore to my father that I'll bury him in Egypt. So in verse 6, and Paro said, go up and I'm sorry, in Israel, and Paro said, go up and bury your father as he adjured you. So if Yosef went up to bury his father, and with him went all of Paro's servants, the elders of his household, the elders of the land of Egypt, and all of Yosef's household, his brothers, his father's household. Only the young children, their flocks, their cattle, did they leave in the land of Goshen. So he had a royal escort for his burial. And they brought up with him both chariots and horsemen, and the camp was very imposing. And in verse 10, they came to Gur Hatad, which is across the Jordan, and there they held a great and imposing eulogy, and he ordained a 7-day mourning period for his father. And when the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning in Gur Hatad, they said, this is a grievous mourning for Egypt, therefore it was called Aval Mitzrayim, the mourning of Egypt, meaning mourning with M-O-U-R, which is across the Jordan. So then his sons did what they commanded. They buried him in the cave of Machpelah. And in verse 15, on page 287, then Yosef's brothers perceived that their father was dead, and they said, perhaps Yosef will nurse hatred against us. Then he will surely repay us for all the evil that we did him. So they instructed that Yosef be told, your father gave orders before your death, saying, don't do evil, please forgive them, and don't do any evil to them. And Yosef wept when they spoke to him. And so now he was, so their brothers were afraid that he was kind to them just to placate his father, because his father would be distressed if he repaid them for their cruelty to him. And but they were worried now that their father's gone, maybe he'll take revenge. And in verse 18, his brothers said, and on page 289, verse 18, his brothers themselves also went and flung themselves before him and said, we are ready to be your slaves. But in verse 19, but Yosef said to them, fear not, for am I instead of Hashem? Although you intended me harm, Hashem intended it for good in order to accomplish it. Is as clear as this day, that a vast people be kept alive. So now fear not, I will sustain you and your young ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke to their heart. And I heard from my receiver, Chaim Bressler, that if you look at this, they said, please don't take revenge. And they apologized, and Yosef wept, and he said, fear not, you intended me harm, but Hashem intended, I will sustain you, I'll do good. He comforted them. It never says he forgave them. The Torah does not say they actually said, I forgive you. He said, it's for the best, don't worry, the good came out of it. He never said, I forgive you. And I heard from our Shiva that this is the reason why we find that throughout the generations we've been punished for this. And we on Yom Kippur we read the 10 Harugi Malchus, the 10 martyrs who were killed by the Romans, and our sages say they were killed because as revenge for the sale of Yosef. That the Caesar said, you've never had 10 men like you, and now it's time to pay for the sale for the 10 brothers who were all the brothers except Yosef and Benjamin, who isn't exactly accurate, but I'll leave it at that, who were involved in the sale. So, but if they were truly forgiven, that wouldn't have occurred. It was only because Yosef never actually said they were forgiven that this occurred. And I saw a story, I think, with Ramosha Feinstein, that he was a judge for a din Torah for a Jewish court case for two people who were in a dispute, came to him, and he judged the case and decided for one of them, but he told one of them to tell the other one, it's over, it's resolved, tell him you forgive him. And the person said, it's okay, it's it's dealt with, we resolved it. And Rabbi Shafan said, just tell him you forgive him. And he said, oh, don't worry about it, it's resolved. And Rabbi Shafan kept on insisting, tell him you forgive him. And he said, years later, the person understood that the reason why he kept on insisting that it was okay was because he truly did not forgive him. He was saying that saying it's okay, he couldn't bring himself to say, I forgive you. And he realized that Moshe Feinstein was pushing him in that direction. And he said also with a story with Rabbi Kollel I read, that there was one time that someone actually sinned against him is the wrong way to put it, but caused great distress to Rabbi Kollel. And afterwards, they went over to him and asked him for forgiveness. And he stopped, looked at them, grabbed onto their hand, and held it for minutes. And then said, I forgive you. I forgive you. Meaning that he had to bring himself to, and he realized, I can't say I forgive you. He was a man of truth and he wasn't ready to forgive him. And he had to give himself time to bring himself to a feeling of forgiveness, and then said, I forgive you. And it was a very serious thing to them. Forgiveness is a very important and serious thing, but it's something that could be difficult. And Yosef, it did not, in fact, say that he forgave them because he maybe didn't. And deep in his heart, the forgiveness wasn't there. Okay, so then the Parsha concludes in verse 22.
Can we ask a question about that?
Sure.
Or you want me to wait?
What's that?
Should I wait to ask the question?
Yeah, why don't we finish the Parsha? We're just about there.
Okay.
In verse 22, Yosef dwelt in Egypt. He and his father's household. Yosef lived 110 years. He saw 3 generations through Ephraim. Even the sons of Machir, son of Menashe, were raised on Yosef's knees. And Yosef said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but Hashem will surely remember you and bring you out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Then Joseph adjured the children of Israel, saying, when God will indeed remember you, he's saying, Hashem will remember you, take you out of Egypt. When Hashem does, then you must bring my bones out of here. And Yosef died at the age of 110 years. They embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. This concludes the book of Bereshis.